Today we're getting ready to do round 2 of our rendering lard. I'm going to do things a couple of different ways this time. I am going to use the grinder instead of chopping them into little pieces, and then I'm going to use them in the crock pot to see if that might help just make things go easier and smoother. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Another thing that I did differently this time is that yesterday I thawed out the packages of the lard, and then I cut them into strips and froze the strips that would fit down the chute, and then I froze them, and I just pulled them out very recently. A lot of the recommendations for processing the lard call for like partially frozen, and we're just going to see if this might help with the process. So let's get going. I was just thinking how much I was thankful that it hadn't done this yet, because it usually does this all the time. Okay, so I think the key to making this grinder work is just making sure that it is frozen solid. Once it has started to actually thaw out a little bit, it's making it much more difficult for the grinder to go. And I've always done it either just a little bit frozen or thawed out, and that's why I've always had problems with this thing just popping off to the point that I don't even ever want to use it, which is why I didn't want to use it last time I was doing the lard. So I think the trick, if you're having troubles with your meat grinder like I am, just make sure it's frozen solid. We'll see. I have 3 more pans of these to do. I'm going to go ahead and get this one into the crock pot so I don't crack my crock pot with a bunch of frozen stuff. And then we're going to let it melt down a little bit while we are melting the rest of these. And I'm going to, the ones that I already pulled out of the freezer, I'm going to go ahead and put back in the freezer and just pull them out one at a time. So I got about half of the lard, including the stuff that's in the crock pot, of course. I got about half of the lard ground up, and I'm gonna get it into the crock pot. And I have a couple errands I gotta run. I'm gonna leave it for probably an hour or so, and then I'll be back to finish it up once the other lard has finished freezing solid. Speaking words are hard today. So yeah, I'm just gonna do that, and I'll bring you back in about an hour or so, probably longer. So I came home from my errands. It's been about 2 hours, and low on my crock pot is apparently way too hot. And it's just been cooking at a bit too high of a temperature. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull out as much of this that has been liquefied as I can. And then I'll let the other stuff cook just a little bit longer. Alright, so we got one more pan of the lard all ground up, and I have one more left to go. I spent this time sanitizing some jars because I haven't decided if I'm going to store these long term, like on the shelf, or if I'm going to put them in the freezer. So I'm just taking the extra precaution just in case I do need to put them on the shelf. They'll be completely sanitary and I don't have to worry about anything affecting the long-term storage of them. Alright, so what I have here is just the jar with a canning funnel on top, a strainer, and some muslin cloth, just to try and get it as much of the particles out of it as I possibly can. And I'm just going to scoop it in. That's all there is to it. And you want to make sure to stop a little bit short. I'm making sure to use the wide mouth pint jars because I might put these in the freezer and I don't want them to expand to the point that they break like they can with if you use these ones that have the little neck on them. These ones can just feel free to expand as much as they want to. Alright, so I think that's probably going to be just about all I'm going to be able to get out of it this time around. See if we can squeeze enough to get to the 1-inch headspace mark. I think that's about as close as I'm going to get. So all I'm going to do with this stuff, put it right back in the crock pot. And just gonna let them. Whew, it's hot. Okay, so all I'm gonna do with these is I'm just gonna leave them on the countertop until they solidify or get pretty close to it because we're in the middle of summer right now. It's a little warm in the house. So I'm just going to leave them until they're cooled off completely. And then I'll show you what to do next. And then with the leftovers that are in here, I'm going to let these go for probably another hour or so and get as much out of it as I possibly can. And what I usually do with these, when I take out the first round of the lard or the tallow or whatever it may be, I usually write a 1 on the lid. And then any future ones, you know, the next one I'll write a 2. If I ever do a 3, I'll put a 3. And that way I know in the future that that is the more clear, less burnt tasting of the, in this case, the lard. But it usually just helps me kind of keep track and I know roughly the quality of the oil when I pull it out. It works pretty well. Alright, so we're back to it, and we're going to try and get through all of these ones, hopefully before this thing explodes again. One thing that I did notice was that the frozen ones definitely do work better. As you could see, I was able to make it through a whole sheet pan of the frozen lard without it doing anything and exploding or anything. But another thing that I had done was when I left for several hours, I put this, just this unit, not the whole mixer, I put it in the fridge just to, you know, make sure that no bacteria or anything would grow. And so I went ahead and did that again this time and let it cool off in the fridge, because the auger that's in there gets kind of warm if it's running for a long time. So hopefully that will help. We'll find out. So we got this part of it all done, and now just go ahead, take this apart, maybe. Oh, one thing I think I forgot to mention when I was kind of like getting the middle here and picking it out, my particular grinder, coming out of the center of it, let me take this off and show you. Oh. Coming out the center right here, this tends to accumulate like some metal. It just turns all the fat kind of a gray color, and I'm assuming that might be aluminum. So I pick out as much as humanly possible and just try and get it all out of there. And the rest of it is mostly plastic. It's a super cheap add-on attachment. I guess maybe not super cheap. It was $40, but I mean, I don't know if all grinders do that, but this one does. And so at some point, I'm going to do a little bit of research and find out if that is normal. If you have a meat grinder and that is not a normal thing, and that's not what all of them do, let me know, and we're probably going to splurge and get a better one, just because I don't like eating aluminum. I try to avoid it. So we're going to move on to the next step then. So my particular crock pot, I had it on warm that whole time and it's still bubbling up. So this one might not be the best crock pot to use for this kind of a project, but because I think it might run a little bit too warm. But if I'm keeping a close eye on it, I think it should be fine for the next round. So this, I'm gonna go ahead and get all the rest of the little cruddy that's inside of the crock pot. I'm gonna let it cool down a little bit. Leave it unplugged for maybe 10 minutes or so before we get started on the next round. And I'm just gonna leave this to drain as much as possible. And when it cools off, I'm just gonna squeeze the muslin and try and get as much of the fat off as I can. I don't wanna let it cool off too much because then the fat's gonna solidify. So I'm gonna try and do this in the right timing. All right, so we have another round of jars that are sanitizing because I didn't do quite enough the first time, and that was all that I could fit in my pot. So now we're gonna go ahead and just dump in one of these containers. Well, actually, let's dump the warm one. This one's been sitting out a little bit longer. So we're just gonna dump it into the crock pot and turn it on low. As I'm sure you've gathered by now, I am not an expert in any way, shape, or form in how to do this. I'm just trying to learn it and share my process with you. So if you guys have any tips or tricks or anything like that to make this process go a little smoother, if you see anything that I'm doing that I shouldn't be doing, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I would love to learn from everybody. And so in this process, this part of the process, from what I'm gathering, you need to kind of let it warm up slowly. If you heat it up too quickly or at too high of a temperature, you can risk scorching the fat and giving it kind of an off taste. So we're aiming for as neutral of a taste as possible. And if you cook it at too high of a temperatures, you're going to get kind of a porky flavor. And if you don't mind having the porky flavor in there, feel free to crank the heat up. But I'm trying to make as neutral as possible and as clear of a lard as possible. So we're gonna let this one warm up, and then once it's kind of warmed up and some of the fat has liquefied, we're gonna add that other one to it and just kind of go from there. So I'll bring you back in a little while. So it's been a while since we put this round number 2 into the crock pot. I had to turn it off for a couple hours and go to work. We came back and this is what we have. Let me bring you in so you can see. There we go. There's just a bunch of sediment at the bottom and the oil has gone to the top. It's just kind of a slow little trickle of bubbles there. So now we're just gonna go ahead and jar up what we can and put the rest back in for more. Okay, so we have a fresh funnel and a fresh muslin cloth. Oop. And a new, whoa, one of those. There we go. And when I'm doing this, I'm trying to get the least amount of the sediment at the bottom in the cloth in the beginning. You can't avoid it forever, but the longer you wait to get the sediment into the cloth, the quicker the filtering process will be, in case you're wondering. And this is one of those things where I just save my old lids and I reuse them for this. Since they're just going to go in the freezer, I'm not going to worry about it. And that's why I save the old lids. I don't save them to recan with ever, but I will use them for things like this, dehydrating, anything I'm going to throw in the fridge. I use them a lot for making bone broth and just other kinds of uses that are not canning. It's hot. And also another thing, when I'm ladling this in here, I'm trying to keep it above the actual funnel in there. The last time that I was doing this earlier today, it was just kind of seeping out over the edge because I think it was because I had a larger size of the, it's late tonight, my brain's gone. I had a larger size of the colander or the strainer or whatever, and so it was leaking over the edges and it was kind of seeping down the sides. So I think this is helping a bit. And when you're ladling this all in here, you definitely want to make sure that you're doing it while the fat is still hot. Because if you let it cool off, pretty much even just a little bit, it's going to be really hard to get it through the muslin cloth. And for long-term storage and things like that, you really want to make sure that you're getting it as clean and as pure as you possibly can. And you don't want to have any kind of sediment or anything like that in there. Yo, got a little too much in there. And I got a little too much on my thumb. I think I've reached the part where it's going to be difficult to hold it above the funnel. Because I have to tilt this. Just going to try and get one more jar out of this before I put it away again. Alright, I think that's probably about as much as I'm going to be able to get. And then all I'm going to do is just put it right back in there. Scrape off what of this we can. And then we're also going to add from the previous batch, which has kind of solidified. Maybe I shouldn't have squeezed the muslin cloth so hard. Okay, I think that's about all I'm going to be able to get out of there. And so far, we've been able to get 8 pints of the lard. And I would expect we could probably finish off this one from the round 2 on the previous round. And then we could probably finish this off and maybe get one more. We'll see. But my battery's dying and it is super late, so I need to finish up all my evening stuff, and then I will see you tomorrow and I'll show you what we ended up with. It's the next day here and we are totally finished with the lard project. You can see it's all just done and wrapped up. And we ended up getting the 8 jars from the first round. And then we also have this jar here that you can see this is round 2 on top and then round 1 on the bottom. I just poured it on top of the little bit that we had left, and you can see pretty drastically the difference between a round 1 rendering and a round 2. You know, there's definitely a difference with that. So this one is going to have more of a porky kind of flavor, so you definitely want to use this one in more savory dishes. And then these ones here you can use for other things. I don't know if you necessarily want to use it for baking, but you probably could. I haven't tried that yet, and I might try it. I don't know. I don't do a whole lot of baking, so if the opportunity presents itself, I will probably give it a try, and I'll let you know in a future video. And I actually, our house is pretty warm right now, so I had to put this one in the fridge just to get it to solidify, because all the other ones still look like this the next day. And that is just the yellow unsolidified lard on top. So I'm just gonna, they're cool and they're room temperature, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw those in the freezer. I might throw them in the fridge first just to make sure. But yeah, we're totally done and wrapped up, and that's all there is to rendering fat. It doesn't take a whole lot of hands-on time. The main part with that is just the getting it chopped up or ground up. And then after that, it's just, you kind of got to be kind of near it to make sure it doesn't get scorched or burnt or anything like that. But it's a pretty simple, straightforward, easy process with not a whole lot of hands-on time. And for the result and the, for what you get out of it, I think it's definitely worth it. I got 9 pints of amazing lard, and all it took was some time. I actually got the actual fat for free, so it cost me nothing but the cost of the energy to make it and my time. So I think it's definitely well worth it. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you like it. If you do, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. And if you have any tips or tricks or anything like this, this is my 2nd or 3rd time rendering fat. So I would very much appreciate your input on anything that you know in this thing to do. I would definitely appreciate any feedback or any tips that you may have in the rendering of the lard process or in the grinding of meat or fat. That would be greatly appreciated, and I'm sure everybody else would appreciate reading your comments as well. So I will see you in the next video. Thank you again for watching.